Settle in and let your breathing slow the way a city settles after midnight. Outside your window, imagine Chicago in the 1920s. Streetlights humming softly, streetcars sighing down the rails, and snow turning the sidewalks into quiet paper. You are walking a block that looks ordinary, and that is the point. You think detective work is all gunfire and glamour. Wrong. It is shoes that last, a notebook that never leaves your pocket, and the patience to notice what everyone else steps over. Tonight, with the Sleepless Detective, you drift through the calm routines, warm coffee, slow interviews, humble evidence, and the kind of crimes that begin like a small inconvenience, then turn into a file folder that will not let go. You learn the first lesson on the sidewalk, not in a squad room. The sidewalk is cold, and it is honest. It tells you who rushed, who dragged a heel, who stopped and turned back. A Prohibition-Era detective does not start with a dramatic hunch. You start with your feet and the way the city breathes between streetcars. Listen closely, and you can hear the schedule in the dark. A streetcar sighs at the corner, then rattles away. Somewhere, a delivery truck coughs and settles. A radiator knocks inside an apartment building like it has a complaint. And you keep walking, because walking is how you notice the small things, the ones everyone else edits out, so they can get home and sleep. You think the first case of the night will be a body in an alley. That is what the paper's like. Clean headline, dirty story. But most of your work starts smaller and more irritating. Missing rent money. A broken window. A neighbor who says she heard yelling but cannot remember the words. The kind of trouble that feels like a nuisance until it is not. Congratulations, you have just met the real job. It is not romance, it is routine. You stop under a street light that makes the snow look blue. You take out your notebook, because that notebook is your memory when your own brain gets tired. You write the address, you write the time, you write the name of the person who flagged you down, even if he smells like gin and bad decisions. A case begins like a pebble in your shoe, small, annoying, impossible to ignore once you notice it. A woman stands in a doorway, shawl pulled tight, eyes bright with the kind of fear that tries to look like anger. She tells you someone has been in her back room. Not robbed exactly, just disturbed. A drawer left open, a chair moved, a window latched wrong. She says maybe it is kids. She says maybe it is nothing. But she called anyway, and that means it is already living in her head. You do not tell her she is overreacting. That is how you miss things. You also do not tell her she is definitely right. That is how you create panic. You just nod, slow, and you ask the first questions, the boring ones. When did she notice? What was different? Who else has a key? Who was here yesterday? Who was here last week? You ask gently, because fear makes people forget. And you ask in plain language, because the truth does not need fancy words. Then you do what detectives actually do. You look. The hallway smells like boiled cabbage and coal smoke, Chicago's favorite perfume. The stairs creak in the same spot every time, and you file that away. A burglar learns a building by sound. A detective has to do the same, except you are learning it after the fact, when the song is already over. In the back room, you do not rush. Rushing is how you step on the clue that was waiting for you. You let your eyes move slowly, like you are reading a page. Dust on the windowsill. A half-dead plant. A pile of laundry folded with stubborn care. You notice the clean spot on a shelf where something used to be. Not stolen, maybe. Just moved. That matters. People think a crime scene is loud. Flashbulbs, shouting, men in hats pointing at things. But most scenes are quiet, almost polite. A room after something happened is just a room, with a few details that no longer agree with each other. You touch nothing. Not yet. You stand where you can see the whole space, and you let your brain do its slow work. There is a window, and the latch is crooked. There is a small scuff in the paint near the frame, like a tool kissed it. There is a footprint near the radiator, faint in the dust, a heel mark and a drag. A person who was careful until they were not. Congratulations, you have something real. Not a confession, not a name. Just a mark left by someone who did not think anyone would look down. You ask the woman if the window ever sticks. She says yes. In winter, it swells. You ask if she has ever pried it. She says no, never. You do not accuse. You just listen. Then you do the dullest magic in the world. You compare her words to the evidence in front of you. A Prohibition-Era detective learns this fast. Most mysteries are not clever puzzles. They are people being tired, scared, or careless. A man forgets he told one neighbor he was out of town, then tells another he was home all night. A woman claims she never leaves the shop, but her shoes tell you she has been walking in wet alley slush. A kid swears he did not touch the cash box, but his fingers are still black with ink from the bills. And sometimes, the ordinary trouble is the beginning of something darker. A back room disturbed can be a burglar testing a place. It can be a jealous lover looking for letters. It can be an accountant with sticky hands checking whether anyone counts the receipts. Or it can be someone hunting for liquor. Because in this city, in this decade, liquor is both a drink and a currency. Prohibition makes everything feel slightly sideways. The law says one thing, the street says another. Officially, the bars are closed. Unofficially, the city is a throat that still wants to swallow. People drink behind curtains, behind butcher shops, behind social clubs that are social in the same way a cat is friendly right up until it scratches you. You step back out into the hall and you feel the cold again. Your fingertips sting and your notebook paper feels damp at the edges. You ask the building's janitor if he saw anyone unusual. He says no. Of course he says no. Then you ask who comes in after midnight, because you know the answer is not no. He pauses and he gives you a name, maybe a boarder, maybe a cousin, maybe a man who claims to be a salesman but never seems to sell anything. It is not glamorous. It is a small conversation under a bare bulb. But it is the job. When you return to the street, you do not have a dramatic solution. You have a few notes and a sense of direction. That is most nights. The city does not hand you truth. It makes you earn it, one slow question at a time, and the rhythm of the work keeps you warm. Not physically. Chicago never bothers with that. But mentally, the routine gives you something to hold. You learn your own basics. Shoes that last, a coat that does not complain, a notebook that stays dry if you tuck it right, a pencil because ink freezes and pens fail, and patience, the kind that does not feel heroic, just stubborn. A patrolman might tell you the story the quick way. He will say, "It is probably kids. It is probably a drunk. It is probably nothing." The patrolman has a route and a night that will not end. He is trying to keep the city from boiling over. You are doing something different. You are trying to understand which small troubles are seeds and which ones are just the city shedding its skin. So, you keep walking. You pass a corner grocery where the lights are still on, and a tired clerk watches you like you might be trouble. You pass a church with dark windows and a bell that will not ring again until morning. You pass an alley that smells like wet cardboard, and you make a note of the footprints there too, because alleys are the city's second set of hallways. You think you are looking for crime, but most of the time, you are looking for patterns. Who belongs? Who does not? What happens every night? And what happened tonight that did not happen last night? That is why detective work is boring in the best possible way. It is not about adrenaline. It is about attention. A few blocks later, you find the warm part of the job, a diner that never fully closes because the city never fully sleeps. The glass is fogged from coffee and frying onions. Inside, the light is yellow and forgiving. You slide into a booth that has seen too many men like you, and you order coffee that tastes like it has been thinking about being coffee for hours. The waitress pours without asking questions. That is a professional courtesy. She has her own investigations. Who is cheating? Who is short on rent? Who is too drunk to drive? Everyone in the city is a detective in their own small way. Yours just comes with paperwork. You open your notebook again, and you copy your notes into something cleaner. A detective learns to rewrite because your first notes are written in wind and hurry. You list names, you list addresses, you underline the window latch, you circle the janitor's paws. You do not trust your memory. Memory is a bartender. It pours heavy and it waters things down. Somewhere behind you, a couple argues in low voices. Not about murder, about money, about family, about a mistake that has been sitting between them for months. That is the background music of most crimes. Not evil, just pressure. When you finish the coffee, you stand slowly. Your joints complain. The job is not kind to bodies. You step back out into the cold and you feel the city's quiet again. You check in at the station because the station is where the night turns into paper. The desk sergeant looks up and his eyes are tired in a way that never goes away. He asks if you have anything. You say, maybe. You hand over a name, an address, and a description that is mostly guesswork. He writes it down like he has written down 1,000 names. This is the part people never put in the movies. The forms, the logs, the phone calls, the waiting. A detective's power is not a gun. It is a system. Imperfect, slow, human. A complaint gets written, a note gets filed, a name gets added to a list. You build a case the way a city builds grime, one day at a time. And in Prohibition-Era Chicago, the lists are long. Liquor violations, gambling rooms, stolen cars, missing persons who are not missing so much as avoiding someone. Domestic fights that turn into bruises and broken dishes. Shop owners who claim they were robbed but cannot explain why their ledger is already cooked. You learn quickly that crime is not a special category of person. It is just what happens when ordinary people choose the shortcut. Some do it once, Some do it for a living. Some do it because they think they are entitled. Congratulations! You are now employed by human nature. Back on the street, you keep your eyes open for the small routine signals. A door that opens too often. A light that never goes out. A man who stands on a corner without looking like he is waiting for a streetcar. A boy delivering packages too late at night, too heavy to be newspapers. Most cases begin with a complaint, but the city gives you extra information if you pay attention. You learn to listen to doormen because they see who comes home and who does not. You learn to talk to cabbies because they hear what people say when they think the ride is private. You learn to be polite to bartenders, even the illegal ones, because bartenders keep secrets the way banks keep money. You are not above anyone. That is another myth. A detective who acts superior gets fed lies. A detective who acts like a tired human being gets fed something better, a half-truth, an accidental clue, a name dropped without thinking. There is a kind of calm to it, if you let it be calm. You are not chasing a villain through smoke. You are assembling a picture from scraps. The scraps come from the city's pockets: receipts, keys, rumors, shoe prints, and quiet grudges. And every so often, the boring work saves you. You remember the janitor's pause. You remember the scuffed paint. You remember that the woman's window sticks in winter. You realize the person who pried it did not fight the swelling wood. They knew exactly where to push. That means they have been there before, or they have watched, or someone told them. Not dramatic, just specific. You walk back to the building, not because you expect the culprit to be waiting like a stage actor. You go back because detectives recheck things. The first visit tells you what is obvious. The second tells you what is true. In the alley behind the building, the snow is thinner, trodden into gray slush. You see more footprints here, layered like old arguments. But one set catches your eye. The tread is unusual, a pattern that looks like little diamonds. You kneel, careful, and you look closer. You cannot photograph it easily. Not in a neat way. Not yet. Cameras exist, sure, but they are not as convenient as people imagine. A lot of documentation is still your notebook, your sketch, your memory written down before it changes. So you draw the tread pattern, slow and simple, like a child copying a stamp. This is detective work. A grown adult in a long coat, crouched in slush, drawing a shoe, like it is important. Because it is. People can lie. Shoes are less imaginative. You stand and you glance up at the windows. One of them has a curtain that moves too quickly. Someone watched you. Or the building just breathed. You do not jump at shadows. You just note it. Then, because you are not a magician, you do the next boring thing. You talk to someone who sells shoes. There is a cobbler shop a few blocks away, a narrow place that smells like leather and glue. The cobbler looks up as you enter, and his eyes flick to your coat, to your posture, to the little things that say you are not here for a polish. You show him your sketch, and you ask if he recognizes the tread. He squints. He hums softly. He says, "It looks like a common work boot, but that particular diamond pattern, he has seen it on a certain brand. He cannot remember the name at first. He thinks. He tells you the kind of men who buy it: warehouse workers, delivery men, railroad hands. Men who need soles that do not slide on wet boards. You thank him and you pay for nothing. because you did not buy anything, and because favors are currency too. You write down what he told you, and you underline it twice. Your case is still small. It is still only a disturbed room. But now you have something that connects to the city's schedule, to deliveries, to labor, to the flow of goods. In Chicago, goods move like blood. If you can follow the movement, you can often find the wound. And that is when you start to feel the daily rhythm of the job, not just the night walk and the coffee. The way mornings start late and end later. The way your desk becomes a second home with a stack of papers that never shrinks. The way phone calls arrive like raindrops. One, then another, then a steady tapping you cannot ignore. In the morning, you will be handed new complaints. A shopkeeper missing a deposit. A husband insisting his wife ran off, though her coat is still on the hook. A landlord angry about a tenant who vanished. And you will handle them the same way. Shoes, notebook, patience. A lot of detecting is waiting outside a building, pretending you are just another man in a coat, waiting near a phone, because the call you need will come when it wants to, waiting by an alley that smells like yesterday, because people use alleys like shortcuts for their sins. You learn to keep faces in your head, the bartender with the heavy eyebrows, the doorman with the limp, the cabbie who chews gum like he is trying to solve a problem, the clerk who watches everyone's hands. These people notice everything, and they remember more than they realize. And the city itself runs on schedules, deliveries at dawn, shift changes at the factories, church bells on Sunday, the hour a place gets noisy, and the hour it goes quiet again. When you learn those rhythms, you can spot what does not fit. Because the places that do not fit the schedule, the ones that glow softly with wrongness, those are the places that keep you employed. And once your feet stop noticing the cold pavement, your eyes start noticing the small routines that make the whole job work. Morning does not arrive like a curtain lifting. It arrives like an invoice. A stack of small obligations slapped onto your desk with tired fingers. The station house smells like wet wool and old smoke, and the floorboards complain every time a patrolman shifts his weight. You sit with your coat still on because the building is colder than the street, and you start sorting the day the way you sort pockets after a long night. The first routine is always the same. Messages, complaints, and favors owed. A desk sergeant slides a slip of paper your way, like he is feeding a machine, a name, an address, a note that says, landlord wants action, tenant vanished, rent unpaid. Another slip, butcher shop, back window broken, nothing taken, but the owner insists someone was inside. Another, a wife says her husband is missing, but the neighbor says he was seen at a social club at 2 a.m. The city cannot decide whether it is panicking or pretending. You think you choose your cases. Wrong. The day chooses you, and you just decide which one gets your legs first. You open your notebook and you start a new page. You write the date in a neat line, because neatness is a kind of prayer. You list the complaints. You underline the ones that smell like trouble. The disturbed back room from last night sits on the list too. Not loud enough to be urgent, but too specific to ignore. You add one more line under it, diamond tread work boot. Likely warehouse or delivery. It is not much. It is enough to keep the file alive. The phone on the wall rings, and the sound is flat and rude. You wait, because sometimes it is for you, and sometimes it is just the building being noisy. A patrolman answers, listens, and covers the mouthpiece with his palm. He looks at you with the expression of a man handing over a stray dog. It is a bartender, not a legal one. He says there was a fight in a basement room off Clark Street. Nobody died, as far as anyone admits, but a man left bleeding, and the others carried the furniture back into place like they could rearrange time. The bartender wants it handled quietly. Of course he does. Everyone wants quiet. Quiet is how people keep their jobs, their marriages, their illusions. You stand, slow, and you roll the stiffness out of your shoulders. Your coffee has gone cold again. It always does. You take one more sip anyway, because bitterness is familiar, and you are a man built on familiar things. On the way out, you stop by the bulletin board, where notices are pinned like dried leaves. Stolen cars, missing girls, men wanted for questioning. A sketch of a face that could belong to half the city if you squint. The ink is smudged where too many fingers have pointed. You look anyway, because looking is a habit, and habits are what keep you from missing the one detail that mattered. Outside, the streets are louder than they were at night, but not happier. Chicago in daylight is still Chicago. Wagons and early automobiles, a rattle of streetcars, and men in hats moving with purpose that might be work or might be pretending. Snow has turned to slush at the curb. The gutters run brown. The air tastes like coal and damp paper. You walk toward Clark Street and you pay attention to the schedule. That is always the trick. The milk deliveries, the bakery carts, the shift changes. When something happens outside the rhythm, it leaves a bruise on the day. Clark Street has storefronts that look respectable if you do not stare. A tailor with suits in the window, a barber with a striped pole, a tobacconist pretending he sells only tobacco. You pass a doorway with no sign, just a buzzer, and a man who stands nearby like he is waiting for a friend. He watches you too carefully. Congratulations, you have found the first warning light. You do not flash a badge. You do not announce yourself. You just walk like you belong, because most places in this city survive by assuming no one official will look too close. You step into the hallway. The warmth hits you first. Stale heat, sweat, beer spilled and wiped up with a rag that has given up. Downstairs, music leaks through the floor, muffled by brick. A piano, trying to sound cheerful. Laughter, trying to sound natural. At the bottom of the stairs, a door opens, and the room breathes out. The ceiling is low. The air is crowded. The light is yellow, soft enough to flatter every face into looking less guilty. There is no glamour here. No sparkling chandeliers. Just tables too close together, chairs that wobble, and glasses that clink like nervous teeth. A speakeasy, in the popular imagination, is silk and jazz and women in beads. In the real world, it is a converted basement with a cash box and a man watching the door. Most illegal bars are practical. They exist because someone needs money and someone else needs a drink, and both are willing to pretend that makes it romantic. The bartender sees you, and his shoulders tighten for a moment. He is not surprised you came. He is surprised you came in the morning, when the room still smells like last night. He leans close, so his words do not travel. He tells you the story in pieces, like a man handing over hot coals. A customer got loud. Another customer took offense. Words turned to fists. Someone produced a bottle and used it like a weapon. A man went down, and the others dragged him toward the back door to keep the front room clean. You let him talk. You do not interrupt. People reveal more when they are allowed to keep their own rhythm. Then you ask the questions that always feel insulting because they are simple. What time did it start? Who was involved? Who saw it? Where did the bleeding man go? The bartender gives you a name that may be real and a description that definitely is not complete. He points with his chin toward a corner table where a man in a vest pretends he is reading the paper. Witness number 1 or liar number 1. Those are often the same person. You walk over, and the man looks up slowly, like he is annoyed at being included in reality. His hands are clean, but his nails have grime under them. He smells faintly of machine oil. He is not here for the music. He is here because this room offers something he cannot buy in a store. You sit across from him without asking. That is another small routine. If you ask, they say no. If you sit, they decide whether to tolerate you. Tolerance is enough to start. You ask what he saw. He says he did not see much. Of course he did not. You let silence stretch. Silence is a tool. It makes people feel it the way water finds cracks. He clears his throat. He says, "All right." He saw a man with a scar near his ear. He saw another man, taller, wearing work boots with a diamond tread. He noticed because the taller man kept tapping his foot like he could not keep still. The witness laughs softly, like that detail is nothing. Your notebook opens in your hand without thinking. Diamond tread again. Congratulations. Your small disturbed back room has just reached out and grabbed your sleeve. You keep your face calm. You ask the witness where the tall man works. The witness shrugs. He says, "By the river, maybe. Warehouse, rail yard, somewhere men sweat and nobody asks questions." He says the tall man is called Eddie, or maybe that is what people call him when they want him to turn around. You write it down. Names in this city are slippery. Nicknames are cheaper than truth. The bartender interrupts gently. He says, "The bleeding man went out the back, toward the alley, toward the river." He says 2 men helped him, and one of them had hands like a butcher, thick and red. You stand again, and you feel the room watching you. That is another routine. When you move, the room measures you. Illegal places do that. They survive by tracking attention. They know exactly how much attention kills them. Outside, the alley behind the building is narrow, and the snow has been trampled into a gray paste. Barrels sit against the brick wall like tired sentries. The smell is sharp: beer, urine, and old vegetables. You look for blood. Sometimes it shows, dark and rusty against the slush. Sometimes it is wiped away with a rag and a prayer. Near the back door, you find a smear that looks like someone tried to clean quickly and did not do a good job. The brick is darker there. The slush has a faint pink tint at the edges. You crouch and you touch the spot with a gloved finger. It is tacky. Recent enough. You follow the alley with your eyes. There are footprints everywhere, but you know what you are looking for now. Diamond treads pressed into slush like a stamp. You find them near a stack of crates. Then again, closer to the street, a straight line, like the man walked quickly and did not look back, or like he was trying very hard not to run. Detective work in moments like this is just adult hide and seek. You are following the marks someone left because they believed nobody would bother. You walk the line of footprints until they dissolve into traffic and chaos. A streetcar clatters past, cutting the world in half. A delivery truck sprays slush. A boy runs by with newspapers tucked under his arm, shouting headlines that have nothing to do with your day. The city covers tracks the way it covers everything, by moving. So you do the next routine. You do not chase. You ask. There is always someone watching. A doorman, a shop clerk, a woman leaning out a window, a man sweeping his own sidewalk because it makes him feel in control. You stop at a small grocery on the corner where barrels of potatoes sit by the door. The owner looks up, wary. You ask if he saw two men helping a third, bleeding down the alley earlier. He hesitates, then he points with his lips, the way people do when they do not want to be caught pointing. He says they went toward the river. He says they got into a cab. He says the cab had a dented fender and a driver with a flat cap pulled low. Cab drivers, you learn, are the nervous system of the city. They carry secrets from one neighborhood to another, and they hear confessions people never intended to make. But they are also cautious. A cabbie can disappear if he talks to the wrong person. You go to the nearest cab stand, and you wait. That is the real work again. Waiting where the city can hand you what it knows. When a cab finally pulls up, you glance at the fender, not dented. Wrong car. The driver eyes you, and you can see the calculation. Fare, trouble, time. You ask about a dented fender cab, and the driver laughs like you asked about a ghost. Then he nods. Small. He says he knows the one. Runs late. Picks up men who do not want attention. He says the driver is named Louis, or maybe that is what the other drivers call him. He says Louis likes coffee and hates the police, which is the normal combination. You hand the driver a coin for his trouble. Not a bribe, a courtesy. In this city, money is often just a way of saying, I respect your time. Respect buys more truth than threats ever do. You spend the next hour doing what people imagine detectives never do. You stand around, cold, pretending you are just another man waiting for something. You watch cabs. You watch faces. You watch the way men walk when they are relaxed, and the way they walk when they are carrying something heavy. Finally, a cab rolls in with a dented fender. The driver looks tired, irritated, and alert. That combination makes you careful. You step to the window, and you speak like you are ordering a ride. You ask where he was earlier, near Clark Street. His eyes narrow. He says he has been everywhere. That is not an answer. You ask again, softer. You mention a bleeding man. You mention two helpers. You do not accuse. You just lay the facts on the seat between you like a folded coat. The driver swallows. He looks away. He says he took 3 men to a rooming house near the river. He says he did not like it. He says one of the men paid extra and told him not to look back. You write down the address. Rooming houses are a detective's second office. They are full of people who are almost invisible, and invisibility is useful to anyone trying to avoid questions. You could rush there. You could bring uniforms. You could kick doors. That is how you turn a small case into a loud one. And loud cases make people scatter. Instead, you go the slow way. You go by yourself or with one partner, and you walk up like you belong. The rooming house is tall and tired, with peeling paint and a vestibule that smells of boiled laundry. The landlady sits behind a small desk near the entrance, like a spider in a web of keys. She looks you up and down and decides she does not like you. That is fine. You do not need her to like you. You need her to remember. You ask if 3 men came in earlier. She says no. Then you ask if a man is bleeding upstairs. Her face tightens. She says, "People come and go." Then you ask, gently, if she wants blood on her stairs. That lands. Landladies are practical. They do not fear crime in the abstract. They fear damage. They fear noise. They fear tenants who stop paying. She sighs and she nods toward the back stairwell. 3rd floor, room 7. She says, "Do not make trouble. Congratulations. You are about to make exactly the kind of trouble she means. The stairs are narrow. The wood dips in the middle from years of feet. You climb slowly, listening. Doors on either side hold quiet lives. Coughing, murmured conversations, a radio playing low like a secret. On the 3rd floor, the hallway smells of disinfectant and cheap cologne. You stop at room 7. You do not kick. You knock. A pause. Another knock, firmer. Inside, something shifts. A whisper. A chair. Scraping. The door opens a crack, and a face appears. Young, tense, eyes darting like a cornered animal. You show enough authority in your posture that he understands you are not selling anything. You ask if someone is hurt. The young man says no. You let your gaze drift past him, into the room. You see a bed. You see a basin of water, pink at the edges. You see a rag soaked through and tossed on a chair. You see, on the floor near the bed, a pair of work boots with diamond tread. The young man sees your eyes land on them, and his jaw tightens. He is thinking, run, lie, fight, beg. Those are the usual options. He chooses lie because it feels safest. He says the boots are his. He says he cut himself shaving. He says he does not know anything about a fight. He says he has been here all morning. You nod, like that might be true. Then you ask, casually, why the basin water is on the floor instead of on the washstand. You ask why there is a second glass on the table. You ask why the rag is soaked like it has been pressed to a wound, not used to wipe a chin. Small questions, boring questions. They corner people better than shouting. From the back of the room, a low groan answers for him. You step forward, and the young man flinches. You are not fast. You are steady. You move past him, and you see the bleeding man on the bed, pale and sweating. His shirt is cut open, and a bandage is tied around his side with the kind of knot a man makes when he is not trained, just desperate. The bleeding man looks at you, and his eyes fill with something like hate or fear or maybe relief. It is hard to tell. Pain makes expressions messy. You ask his name. He does not answer. You ask who did this. He coughs, and the cough is wet. He says, "A man? Eddie." He says it like a curse. There it is again. The same name, floating up from different mouths. That is how you know you're in the right neighborhood of the truth. You could arrest them both. You could haul them down to the station and let the system grind. But the system, in this era, is not gentle. It chews people. It loses papers. It forgets witnesses. It lets men with money slip through like smoke. So you do what you can with what you have. You tell the young man to fetch a doctor, not a hospital, because hospitals ask questions. The young man nods too fast. He wants to be useful. Useful is how people buy mercy. You look around the room, not like a thief, but like a man counting exits. You see a jacket thrown over a chair. You see a pocket turned inside out, like someone searched it in a hurry. You see a small envelope on the table, stained with a thumbprint of blood. You do not touch it yet. You ask the bleeding man, again, what happened? He speaks in fragments. He says he owed money. He says he thought the speakeasy would be neutral ground. He says Eddie took it personal. Pride. Again. Always pride. He says Eddie said something about a package that went missing. Something meant for a back room. Something meant to be quiet. A back room. Congratulations. You feel the cases starting to braid together. You take out your notebook and you write down the words exactly, even the ones that do not make sense yet. Package, missing, back room, Eddie, work boots, river. The bleeding man closes his eyes. He is fading, not dying, but drifting into that place where pain is louder than the room. You tell him calmly that he should stay awake, not for heroics. Just because unconscious men cannot answer questions, you step back into the hallway and close the door gently. You do not want the landlady listening too closely. You lean against the wall and you think through the day in the slow way that keeps you from being stupid. This is the daily rhythm of a prohibition detective. Mornings start late because nights run long. Information arrives like dripping water, and you collect it in a bucket that is always leaking. You trade small favors for small truths. You buy coffee for cabbies. You promise landladies you will keep it quiet. You nod at bartenders who should not exist. You gather names that might be real. You gather addresses that are definitely real. And most of it feels like waiting. Waiting in hallways. Waiting by phones. Waiting for a man to bleed slowly enough that he can still talk. Back at the station, if you go back, you will have to write this down. Every detail, every address, every time. That paperwork is not decoration. It is what turns a story into something a judge might believe months from now, when everyone is tired and trying to forget. But you are not ready to go back yet. Not until you understand what the missing package was. Not until you know whether it is liquor or money or something smaller and stranger, like letters. You head downstairs and you speak to the landlady again. You ask, who is in room 8? Who is in room 6? Who visits room 7? She tells you nobody visits. Then she tells you a man did come by last week with a cap and a narrow face, and he did not sign the book. She remembers because he smelled like river water and cigars, and because he did not look at her. Men who do not look at landladies are often men who do not want to be remembered. You ask if she has his name. She does not. But she says he left something once. A folded note dropped near the desk. She picked it up, meaning to throw it away, but then she tucked it into a drawer. Landladies keep things. They do not call it evidence. They call it leverage. She opens the drawer and slides the note across. The paper is creased and the ink is blurred, but you can read enough. An address. Not this rooming house. Another. A warehouse address near the river. You thank her and you fold the note back carefully. You do not promise anything you cannot deliver. You just say you will try to keep trouble off her stairs. She snorts like she has heard that before. Outside again, the day has moved on without you. The sky is the color of dishwater. The river wind cuts through your coat. You walk toward the warehouse district, and you watch the men who pass. Heavy coats, thick hands, faces set into the expression of work. They are not villains. They are labor. But labor in this city often brushes against crime the way sleeves brush in a crowded streetcar. Near the river, the smell changes. Less coal smoke, more wet wood and old fish. Warehouses line the streets like blunt bricks. Doors roll up and down. Men push carts. A foreman shouts. Chains clank. The city's bloodstream is loud here, carrying goods that will end up on tables, in pockets, in hidden rooms. You find the address from the note. A warehouse with a faded sign and a loading dock slick with ice. You stand across the street for a moment, just watching. That is another routine. You do not walk in blind if you can help it. You learn the place first. Who comes and goes? Who smokes by the door? Who looks like he is pretending to work? A truck backs in, and men unload crates. The crates are stamped with markings that could be anything. Produce, maybe, machinery parts, or something that needs to look boring. The men move with practiced speed, not nervous, not rushed. That tells you something too. You cross the street and step onto the dock. A man stops you, not in uniform, but with the authority of someone paid to say no. He asks, "What you want?" You tell him you are looking for a man named Eddie. You say it like you are asking for a clerk. The man's eyes flicker, just once, toward the interior. Then he shrugs and says, "No, Eddie here." You nod, like that is fine. Then you ask, "Who wears diamond tread boots on this dock?" You ask it casually, like you are curious about footwear. The man frowns. He says, "Lots of men." You let your gaze drop to his feet. Plain soles, not diamond. You look past him. Inside, a man walks by carrying a crate. On his feet, diamond tread. He disappears behind a stack before the guard can turn. Congratulations! Your day just got simpler and more complicated at the same time. You do not rush after the man. You do not want to chase through crates. Chases are loud, and loud makes men reach for weapons or exits. Instead, you step closer to the guard and lower your voice. You tell him, calmly, that you were at a rooming house this morning. You tell him a man is bleeding because of last night. You tell him you have names. You tell him you will come back with uniforms if you have to. You do not threaten like a movie villain. You just lay out the boring truth. Paperwork is coming, and it will not be kind. The guard swallows. He is not paid enough to be loyal to anyone. Loyalty is expensive, he says. Wait here. He disappears. Inside, you wait on the dock, listening to the river and the clank of chains. The cold creeps into your boots, and you think of the irony. You are hunting a boot print, and your own feet are going numb. After a few minutes, the guard returns with another man, older, better dressed, a foreman type, with a scarf tucked neatly and hands that look too clean for the dock. He smiles like he is trying to sell you something. He says there is no trouble here. He says they move legal goods. He says Eddie is not an employee. He says maybe you have the wrong place. You let him finish. Then you ask about a missing package. You ask about something meant for a back room. You watch the smile falter. Just a fraction. Enough. He says he does not know what you mean. He says they ship crates. He says they cannot control what happens once it leaves. You nod. Then you ask, softly, Why a warehouse shipping legal goods needs a man at the door whose job is to say no. Most warehouses are happy for business. Guards are for things you are afraid of losing. The foreman's eyes harden. He says, "Who told you to come here?" You tell him, "No one." You say you follow footprints. You say you follow cab rides. You say you follow blood and slush. And you say, very quietly, that you are tired and you would like this to be easy. He studies you. He decides whether you are bluffing. That is another routine. Men like him live by reading risk. Finally, he sighs. He says Eddie is a freelancer. He says Eddie handles certain deliveries. He says Eddie got angry last night because a crate went missing and the missing crate was not cheap. He says, if you want Eddie, you will not find him here right now. He says Eddie will find you if you make enough noise. That is a confession and a warning, wrapped in the same paper. You ask where Eddie might go when he wants to hide. The foreman laughs once, without humor. He says Eddie does not hide. Eddie drinks, Eddie sleeps, Eddie shows up when he wants to be paid. You ask where he drinks. The foreman shrugs. He names a place on the west side, a club that pretends to be a social hall. You write it down, then you do something that feels almost kind. You tell the foreman you do not care about his crates today. Not yet. You care about the violence. You care about a man bleeding in a rented bed. You care about whether this will turn into something that draws attention from people higher up, people who do not accept quiet compromises. The foreman's expression shifts. He understands that kind of attention too. He nods, slow, and he says he will tell Eddie to come in. He says, maybe Eddie will listen. He says, maybe Eddie will do something stupid instead. He says Eddie is good at stupid when pride is involved. You step off the dock and back onto the street. The river wind hits you again. You feel the weight of your notebook in your pocket, heavier now with addresses and names. This is the rhythm. You walk, you wait, you ask, you write. You do not solve a case with one clever thought. You solve it by being too stubborn to stop. And in the middle of all that, the city keeps its own schedule. Men go to lunch. Trucks make deliveries. A church bell rings somewhere, because time passes whether you are ready or not. By late afternoon, you are back at the station, because there is always paper to feed. You sit at a desk under a bulb that hums like a trapped insect. You pull a form toward you and begin to write date, time, location, names, statements, descriptions. The words come slow because you are trying to make a messy world fit into straight lines. Reports in this era are not typed by everyone. Some are, sure, if the department has the staff and the patience, but much of it is handwriting, tired loops and sharp angles. Your hand cramps. Ink blots if you pause too long. Pencil smears if your palm drags. You learn to write like a monk, careful and repetitive, because this is how you prove later that you did not imagine the details. You also learn the small bureaucratic nightmares. A form missing one line can come back to you, stamped and scolded. A name spelled wrong can become a ghost you cannot find again. An address written sloppy can send another officer to the wrong building, where he will knock on the wrong door and start the wrong fight. So you slow down, you verify, you check your notebook against the report. You copy the warehouse address carefully. You copy the club name carefully. You copy the word Eddie, and then you add possible alias. A clerk walks by and drops more papers on your desk. A missing person report, a petty theft, a complaint about noise. The pile grows like weather. You look at it and feel nothing dramatic. Just a steady awareness that the city produces problems the way lungs produce breath. When you finish the report, you take it to the sergeant. He stamps it, bored, and slides it into a folder. That folder will go into a cabinet. That cabinet will hold 1,000 other folders. This is what justice looks like most days. Not a courtroom speech, but a wooden drawer that sticks when you pull it. As evening comes on, you head toward the West Side Club. Not because you expect a grand confrontation, because that is where the rhythm points next. Clubs like that open early, close late, and pretend not to notice who walks in. They are the city's compromise made physical. Everyone knows, no one says, and money keeps the lights on. The neighborhood changes as you walk. The buildings are tighter together. The streetlights feel dimmer. Or maybe you are just tired enough to notice how little light they actually give. You pass men standing in pairs, talking without moving their lips much. You pass a woman carrying a bag of groceries, eyes forward, moving fast. Ordinary life, threading through ordinary danger. The club is a wide building with curtains in the windows. The sign out front claims it is a social association, the kind that hosts meetings, dances, respectable gatherings. You can hear music inside, a horn, a drum, a piano again. The sound is cheerful in the way people get when they have decided not to think. At the door, a man checks you, not with his hands, with his eyes. He looks at your coat, your shoes, your posture. He decides you are either trouble or money. You let him see just enough of your badge to make the decision for him. His face tightens, but he steps aside. Inside, the air is warmer, thicker. Smoke hangs under the ceiling like a low cloud. The floor is scuffed from dancing. The tables are crowded with glasses and quiet conversations. You move through it like a slow current, letting faces pass through your vision. You are looking for Eddie, but you do not know his face. That is another reality check. Detectives often hunt names before they have pictures, so you look for the shape of the thing instead. The man who holds himself like he owns the room. The man others glance at before they speak. The man who wears work boots in a place where most men try to look sharp. Near the back, by a wall with peeling paint disguised by shadow, you see him. Boots, diamond tread, dusty at the edges. A scar near his ear, just like the witness said. He is laughing with 2 other men, but his eyes are not laughing. His eyes scan the room constantly, like he is expecting someone to try something. You approach slowly. You do not push through people. You wait for gaps, slide through, arrive at his table like you have always been there. He looks up and the laughter stops. You introduce yourself without ceremony. He snorts. He says he does not care who you are. He says he is having a drink. He says you should go bother someone who is actually breaking the law. You look at his glass. You look at the bottle nearby. You let the irony sit there between you. Then you tell him you are not here about the drink. You are here about the missing package. You are here about the blood that got wiped off bricks this morning. For a moment, his jaw tightens, pride again, flaring like a match. He leans forward and says, "Careful, detective." He says the wrong questions in the wrong room can make a man disappear. You nod like that is true, because it is. Then you tell him you already found the rooming house. You tell him the bleeding man is alive. You tell him the landlady remembers faces. You tell him the warehouse foreman talks more than he thinks. Eddie's eyes flicker. Just once. Congratulations. You have found the place where the armor is thin. He sits back and he forces a smile. He says, "So what do you want? You want the truth. But you do not say that. Truth is too big, too dramatic. You say you want the missing package explained and you want the violence to stop before it gets louder." He laughs, low. He says, "The package was liquor. Canadian stuff, brought down through routes everyone pretends not to know." He says it was supposed to go to a back room in a building like the one you visited last night. He says someone tipped off thieves, or someone got greedy, and the crate vanished before it reached the right hands. He says he went to collect what was owed, and the man in the speakeasy got mouthy. He says the man pulled a bottle like that was a weapon. He says Eddie reacted. He says, "You know how it is. You do know how it is. It is always the same. A small missing thing, a bruised ego, a quick decision, then blood, then paperwork." You ask who stole the crate. Eddie's smile fades. He says he does not know. He says he has suspicions. He says maybe it was an inside job. He says maybe the foreman is skimming. He says maybe the cab driver is part of it. He says names like he is tossing bones to a dog. You listen. You write down nothing in front of him. You store it in your head for later, because writing in front of men like Eddie turns a conversation into a confrontation. You ask about the disturbed back room. Eddie narrows his eyes. He says, "What back room?" You describe the window latch, the scuffed paint, the chair moved. You watch his reaction. He does not look confused. He looks annoyed, like you brought up a minor inconvenience he hoped would stay minor. He says, "Yeah, he checked the place last week." He says he uses it sometimes for temporary storage. He says he left something there, and when he came back, it was gone. He says he pried the window to get in because the door was locked, and the person with the key was not answering. He says it like it is normal. In his world, it is. You ask what he left there, he hesitates. Then he says, paperwork, lists, names, delivery schedules. He says it like it is boring, but your spine tightens anyway. Lists are power. In Prohibition Chicago, a list of names is a weapon that does not make noise. You ask, who would want that list? Eddie's eyes harden. He says, anyone? Rival crews? Cops? Politicians? He says, you might want it yourself. You tilt your head. You tell him you do not need his list. You have your own, written in tired handwriting, filed in cabinets, gathering dust. His list, you tell him, is the kind that gets people killed. He watches you for a moment. Then he says, someone already tried. He says a man came into the back room a few nights ago. Not Eddie, not his crew. He says the man was quiet. He says the man knew exactly where to look. He says the man got away. You ask what the man looked like. Eddie shrugs. He says, narrow face, cap, smelled like river water and cigars. The same description the landlady gave you. The cases tighten again, the braid pulling taut. You stand. You tell Eddie you will be back. He laughs. He says, sure you will. He says, be careful walking alone. You leave the club without looking hurried. Outside, The night is coming in, and the streetlights are flickering awake. You feel the familiar tiredness settle into your bones. Not despair, just the weight of routine. Now you have a missing crate, a stolen list, a bleeding man, and a quiet thief with a narrow face. You also have a sense, deep down, that the liquor itself is not the real story. Liquor is just the excuse people use. The real story is always the same: money, pride, fear, and the wish to control what others know. Back at the station, you check a city map spread across a scarred table. Chicago on paper looks orderly, like a promise. Streets in straight lines, neighborhoods labeled, the river drawn like a vein. You trace the points with your finger: the disturbed back room, the speakeasy, the rooming house, the warehouse, the club. A pattern emerges, not clever, just practical. All near routes where goods move. All near places where a man can disappear into crowds. You mark one more place with your pencil: the rail yards. Because if a list of delivery schedules got stolen, the thief will go where schedules become real. Trains, freight, crates, moving in the dark. And that is how the job keeps going. You do not get a neat ending at the end of a day. You get a direction. You get the next place to stand and wait, the next door to knock on, the next man to ask a boring question that makes his story wobble. So you fold the map, tuck it away, and prepare to spend another stretch of hours doing the most unromantic thing imaginable. Watching the city do what it always does, until one small detail finally refuses to fit. The rail yards don't announce themselves like a landmark. No friendly sign, no neat border, just a spreading, clanking geography of iron and soot. You walk toward it with your collar up and your thoughts down low, because the wind off the river has teeth, and because the yards are the kind of place that punishes daydreaming. You think the rail yards are chaos, boxcars, men shouting, whistles, smoke. Wrong. The yards are a schedule with muscle. Everything has a slot. Everything has a number. Every crate has a paper trail that someone somewhere swears is accurate. And if you are hunting a stolen list of deliveries, this is where that list stops being theory and starts being a key. The first thing you notice is the sound: metal on metal, slow and heavy, like the city grinding its own bones. A switchman's lantern swings in a lazy arc. A locomotive exhales, and the breath comes out white in the cold. Men move in thick coats and thin patience. They don't look like criminals. They look like workers, because most of the time, that's exactly who ends up closest to the crime. You don't stride in like a hero. You drift. You become one more tired man moving through an industrial night. You keep your hands out of your pockets so no one mistakes you for someone reaching for trouble. You watch the gatehouse. You watch who gets waved through without being asked. Congratulations! You're learning what belonging looks like when it has a paycheck attached. A yard clerk is the first real obstacle. Not a guard with a gun. Those come later if you insist. A clerk with a pencil behind his ear and a ledger that smells like old paper and newer lies. He looks up as you approach, and his eyes take inventory: coat, boots, face, posture. He doesn't need your name yet. He needs to decide whether you are going to ruin his evening. You ask about freight coming in from the river warehouses. You keep it boring. You keep it procedural. You say you're tracing a misdelivered crate. Not stolen, misdelivered. That word is gentler. It gives the clerk room to help you without admitting he's helping. He sighs the way people sigh when they've been asked to care. He says freight moves. Crates get bumped. Tags fall off. He says if you want miracles, go to church. You nod like you're not asking for a miracle. Then you mention a particular stamp you saw on a crate. The kind that could mean produce or could mean liquor hidden under produce, depending on how much everyone wants to pretend. The clerk's expression shifts. Not panic, just a small recalculation. He tells you to wait, so you wait, because waiting is the closest thing this job has to prayer. You stand near the edge of the office, where the heat from a small stove barely reaches. You watch men file past. You watch the way some of them glance at the clerk like they're checking whether their names are about to get spoken. The clerk comes back with a thin sheet of paper, and he holds it like it might stain his fingers. He says, "The stamp you described has been showing up more often lately." He says it comes in on certain nights. He says it gets transferred fast, like whoever owns it doesn't like it sitting still. He taps the paper with a stubby finger. He won't hand it to you. He won't even let you read it properly. But he murmurs a thing that matters. A car number and a destination that isn't on the official line. A private sighting. A small spur track that leads to a warehouse no one talks about, because talking attracts attention, and attention attracts audits. You write the number down in your head. You write it in your notebook only when his eyes look away. That's another routine. Never make a man feel like he's signing his own confession. You thank him like he did you a favor about the weather. Then you do what detectives actually do with information. You walk it into the world and see what it bumps into. Out in the yard, you follow the logic of the place. Boxcars are lined up like blunt sentences. Some are sealed with fresh lead tags. Some look like they've been opened and closed so often the metal has learned the shape of hands. You find the car number because numbers are honest even when men aren't. There it is, painted and chipped like it's been through 1,000 winters. You don't climb inside, not yet. You just stand close enough to smell it. Wood, cold iron, and underneath, a faint sweetness that doesn't belong. Not apples, not grain. Something sharper, like spilled spirits that have dried and left their ghost behind. Congratulations, you're not imagining things. A switch crew moves nearby, and you step back, casual, letting them do their work. You watch where the car goes. That's the boring part that saves you, because chasing rumors is expensive. Watching reality is free. The boxcar gets nudged forward in a long, reluctant shudder. Couplers clank. A man signals with his lantern. The car rolls toward the private spur, slow, deliberate, like the yard itself is pretending this is just another ordinary movement. You follow at a distance, keeping your pace just slow enough not to be noticed. The spur leads past stacks of timbers and barrels, past a fence that looks more decorative than secure. Then, at the far edge, where the city feels thinner, you see the warehouse, low, wide, and bland. No sign, no pride, just doors and darkness. There are men outside, not workers. Not exactly. Their coats fit better, their hats sit straighter, their hands stay closer to their bodies. They are watching the yard, but not like guards, more like people waiting for a package that has their name on it. You stop behind a pile of crates, and you let yourself become part of the scenery. That's the trick. In a place built for moving objects, Stillness looks natural. A truck backs up to the warehouse door. Its engine ticks in the cold. The driver doesn't get out right away. He waits for a signal. One of the men by the door lifts 2 fingers. The truck door opens. Men move quickly, efficiently, like they've done this too many times to feel excitement about it. This is where you learn another prohibition lesson. Bootlegging isn't glamorous. It's logistics. It's inventory. It's schedules. It's men who can count and men who can keep quiet. The violence comes later when the numbers don't match. You watch for the narrow-faced man, the one that smells like river water and cigars. That's your thread, your quiet thief. The stolen list didn't evaporate. Paper doesn't vanish. It changes hands. For a while, you don't see him. You see only the machinery of a small crime economy working like any other business. And you understand why so many people look away. Because it's easier to ignore a machine than a monster. Then you spot a figure stepping out from the warehouse shadows. Narrow face, cap pulled low. A cigar ember winking like a distant signal. He doesn't bark orders. He doesn't hustle crates. He watches. And when he speaks, other men lean in, like he's saying something they don't want the air to hear. You don't rush him. You don't call his name because you don't have it. You wait for a moment when he moves away from the cluster, when he becomes just one man again, instead of a man protected by a small crowd. He walks toward the fence line, away from the doors, away from the truck. He stops near a stack of broken pallets and lights his cigar properly, shielding the match with his palm. That small gesture tells you something. He's careful. He likes control. He doesn't like surprises, so you give him one anyway, quietly. You step out from behind the crates, not fast, not threatening. Just present. Your boots crunch the snow, and he turns his head like he already knew you were there. His eyes flick to your hands, your coat, your face. He smiles, but it's thin. He says, "You're lost." You tell him you're looking for paper. You tell him a list went missing. You tell him men have been bleeding over it, and you're tired of stepping around the mess. He chuckles once. He says paper burns. He says men bleed for dumber reasons than paper. You nod. You ask him if he's the one who pried a window and took what wasn't his. His expression doesn't change much, but his eyes sharpen. He says, "Lots of people pry windows." He says maybe you should ask the people who leave things in back rooms, like they own the city. That's a fair point. In its own crooked way, you let it sit there. Because you're not here to win an argument. You're here to learn which lies he prefers. You tell him you already asked around. You tell him you've spoken to a landlady with a drawer full of leverage. You tell him you've stood in a speakeasy basement where a piano played while a man bled. You tell him you met a warehouse foreman whose hands are too clean for honest work. The narrow-faced man exhales cigar smoke slowly. He says, "You've been busy." You ask him what he wants. That's the question people forget to ask. Everyone jumps to who and how. Motive is quieter. Motive is what makes the whole ugly machine worth running. He says he wants insurance. He says he wants leverage. He says, in this city, the law is a coat people put on when it's useful and take off when it gets heavy. He says a list of deliveries is a coat you can wrap around someone's throat. Congratulations, he isn't a thief. He's an accountant with sharper tools. You ask, who he's selling it to. He shrugs. He says maybe he'll sell it to rivals. Maybe he'll sell it to cops. Maybe he'll sell it back to the same men he stole it from. He says the best kind of product is the kind you can sell twice. You don't flinch. You've heard worse business plans. You ask him if he knows Eddie. Now the smile fades a little. Eddie, apparently, is a name that tastes bad. The narrow-faced man says Eddie is predictable. Eddie thinks with his fists. Eddie believes fear is the same thing as respect. He says Eddie is the kind of man who breaks clocks because he doesn't like being late. You ask if he's trying to set Eddie up. You ask if the missing crate and the missing list are meant to make Eddie swing at shadows until he hits the wrong person. He doesn't answer directly. People like him rarely do. He says, sometimes a loud man needs a quiet lesson. He says, sometimes the city corrects itself. Then you hear a shout from near the warehouse door. The narrow-faced man's head turns, just a fraction, and in that fraction, you see his real emotion, annoyance. Something has interrupted his plan. You follow his gaze. A man is running toward you both, boots kicking up slush, diamond tread, Eddie's shape, Eddie's habit of arriving like a storm no one ordered. Eddie's face is red from cold and anger. He points, not at you, at the narrow-faced man. He shouts something about stolen paper, about betrayal, about money. And for one suspended moment, you are standing between two kinds of danger, the loud kind and the quiet kind. Congratulations! You've discovered that neither one cares much about your badge. You lift a hand, calm, and you tell Eddie to stop. You tell him this is not a street fight. You tell him there are too many eyes. Eddie laughs like you told a joke. He says eyes don't matter. He says fear matters. The narrow-faced man steps back, smooth, letting Eddie's rage fill the space. He wants that. He wants the loud man to be loud. It makes the quiet man invisible. You shift your stance, small, careful keeping your body angled so you can see both of them. This isn't a duel. This is crowd control with no crowd willing to help you. Eddie closes the distance. He reaches into his coat. You don't draw first, not because you're noble, because drawing first turns paperwork into a funeral. Instead, you talk steady, low. You tell Eddie the bleeding man from last night is alive. You tell him that makes this salvageable. You tell him he can still walk away with only a court date instead of a coffin. Eddie's hand pauses inside his coat. His eyes narrow. For a heartbeat, he actually considers it. Then the narrow-faced man speaks, softly, like he's dropping a coin into a well. He says, Eddie is scared. That's all it takes. Pride is a cheap fuse. Eddie snaps. His hand comes out holding a small pistol. Dull metal, practical, no drama, just a tool. Time slows the way it always does when a stupid decision is being made. You step sideways, putting the stack of pallets between your chest and Eddie's aim. You don't run. Running makes you a target. You move like this is routine, because it is, in the sad way. Eddie fires. The sound cracks across the yard, louder than it should be, echoing off boxcars. Men by the warehouse door shout and scatter. The truck driver ducks. Somewhere a whistle blows, long and angry, like the rail yard itself is protesting. The narrow-faced man bolts, slipping into the shadows near the fence line. Of course he does. He's not here to win a fight. He's here to survive the consequences he manufactures. Eddie charges after him, boots hammering slush. You follow, not sprinting, not heroic, just persistent. The way a bad headache is persistent. You keep the pallets and crates between you and Eddie whenever you can. You hear another shot, then a curse. The chase leads to the edge of the yard, where the fence sags in one place, bent by years of men climbing it when they don't feel like using gates. The narrow-faced man squeezes through. Quick, Eddie tries to follow. Slower, bigger, angrier. His coat catches. He snarls and yanks free. You arrive as Eddie drops to the other side. You don't follow immediately. You look because looking is what keeps you alive. Beyond the fence is a strip of frozen ground and then a narrow service road that runs along the river. Dim streetlights, wet snow, the kind of place where a man can disappear and be found days later if anyone cares enough to look. You hear footsteps, fading, 2 sets, one lighter, one heavier. Eddie is still chasing. The narrow-faced man is still running. You climb the fence with less grace than you'd like. Your coat snags. Your boots scrape. The fence bites your glove. The city always takes a small payment. On the other side, you land wrong, knee complaining. You ignore it. You move forward, using the shadows, following sound more than sight. Ahead, the narrow-faced man darts behind a stack of timbers. Eddie rounds the corner wide, gun still in hand, breathing loud enough to give away his position. Eddie is a man who thinks volume is power. The narrow-faced man stops running. That's what changes everything. A runner who stops is either trapped or ready. Eddie barrels around the timbers, and you see it, a small glint in the narrow-faced man's hand. Not a pistol, a knife, short and sharp, held low. Eddie doesn't notice until he's too close. Then he tries to stop, boots skidding, diamond tread losing grip on slick ground. His pride has carried him into the moment his body can't negotiate. The narrow-faced man steps in and drives the knife forward. Not theatrical, not wild, just a quick, efficient motion, like opening a sack. Eddie grunts, shock more than pain. His gun hand jerks upward. The shot goes wide, shattering a board somewhere. Then Eddie swings, and the 2 men collide in a messy clinch of coats and elbows. This is the part nobody admits. Violence is clumsy. It's not choreography. It's 2 men slipping in slush, trying to out-stubborn each other. You close in, careful. You don't tackle them. You don't grab the gun hand like you've been trained by a movie. You pick the safest angle, the one that keeps you from getting shot or stabbed by accident. You shout, one sharp command, enough to startle them without turning it into a speech. Eddie's head turns. The narrow-faced man's eyes flick to you. That flick is the mistake. You step forward and drive your shoulder into Eddie's arm, knocking the pistol down and away. It skids across the icy ground, stopping near the river's edge. Eddie curses, tries to lunge for it. The narrow-faced man uses the moment to slip backward, like a shadow detaching from a wall. You grab Eddie's coat collar and haul him back. Hard, not heroic, practical. You pin him against the timber stack. His breath comes hot and sour. His eyes are wild, furious, embarrassed. Congratulations, you've just become the adult in the room. The narrow-faced man is already moving away. You can't hold both. That's the reality. You choose the one who will still be here when backup arrives. You choose the loud man, because loud men leave evidence. Eddie struggles, then sags, one hand going to his side where the knife went in. Blood seeps through his coat, dark and steady. His face tightens. The anger drains into something else. Fear, maybe, or the simple realization that bodies have limits. You call out to the yard, loud enough to carry. Men peek from behind fences and boxcars like prairie dogs. Someone finally decides this is above their pay grade and runs toward the gatehouse. A few minutes later, you hear the distant rhythm of uniforms approaching. Boots, voices, the clatter of authority arriving late. You keep Eddie pinned until the patrolmen reach you. They grab him, holding him up when his knees wobble. One of them looks at you with that tired expression, half irritation, half respect. He asks what happened. You tell him the simple version. Gun, knife, attempted murder, Eddie's name, or at least the name people use. You point where the pistol slid. A patrolman retrieves it with a gloved hand, holding it like it's dirty laundry. Another patrolman looks around for the other man. You shake your head. The narrow-faced man is gone. That's how it usually is. The quiet ones leave. The loud ones get filed. They take Eddie toward a wagon. He groans, one hand pressed to his wound. He tries to keep his chin up, like pride can cauterize. You walk alongside because you're already thinking of the next part, the part that happens under humming bulbs with paperwork. On the way back through the yard, you pass the private warehouse again. The men by the door have vanished. The truck is gone. The boxcar sits half open now, like a mouth caught mid-lie. The smell of spirits is stronger. Exposed. A patrolman whistles softly and says, "Would you look at that?" You look. You don't whistle. You just feel the familiar, dull weight settle in, because this is what it always becomes. Not a mystery, a seizure, an inventory, a stack of forms, liquor in bottles that will be photographed, counted, moved into evidence, and then, if you've been around long enough, you already know the rest. Some of it will disappear, not magically, administratively. You walk back to the station with the uniforms, and the night feels colder now that adrenaline is burned off. Your knee aches, your fingers sting, and you can already smell the ink. At the station, Eddie gets pushed into a holding room that smells like sweat and old arguments. A doctor gets called because dead suspects are inconvenient. The desk sergeant looks up from his chair like he's annoyed you've brought him more work. You hand him the essentials, who, what, where. He asks if you caught the other one. You tell him no. You tell him you got a name description, narrow face, cap, cigars. You tell him the man stole the list. You tell him the list is still out there. The sergeant grunts and writes something down like he's carving it into stone. Then, the real work starts. You sit at your desk under the humming bulb. You open a fresh report sheet. You write the date. You write the time. You describe the rail yard, the private spur, the warehouse door, the movement of the boxcar. You describe Eddie's weapon. You describe the direction. The narrow-faced man ran. You use the proper words where you can. You write caliber, if you know it. If you don't, you write small pistol, dark metal, because honesty is better than guessing. You write laceration, if you want to sound medical. Then you translate it into human. Knife wound to left side, bleeding steady, suspect conscious, This is the part where detective work becomes a kind of slow accounting. Every detail gets turned into ink because ink lasts longer than memory. Memory changes. Ink just fades. A clerk comes by and asks you for the chain of custody on the pistol. Who recovered it? When? Where it was placed? It's the kind of question that sounds petty until a lawyer asks it 6 months from now, trying to turn your case into confetti. So you answer carefully. You give names, you give times. You make sure you aren't inventing certainty where you don't have it. That's a habit you cultivate the way other people cultivate gardens. If you plant honesty early, you have something to harvest later. Hours slide by. The station gets quieter, then louder, then quiet again. Men come in drunk. Men come in angry. A woman comes in crying about her sister. A patrolman comes in complaining about his feet. The city keeps producing problems like a machine that can't be shut off. At some point, someone brings you coffee. It tastes like burnt patience. You drink it anyway. An officer from evidence asks about the liquor at the yard. You tell him it's there. You tell him it needs to be logged. You tell him it needs to be photographed. You tell him, quietly, it needs to be guarded, because the funny thing about confiscated liquor is that it tends to grow legs. The officer snorts and says, "Sure, sure." He walks off. You write more. You sketch the layout of the yard in the margin. You mark the fence gap. You mark where the pistol slid. You draw the spur track like a line of fate. Maps and sketches are the old magic. Simple, stubborn, hard to argue with. By the time your hand cramps, dawn is threatening the windows with gray light. That's another routine. The city doesn't care if you finished. Morning arrives anyway. You lean back and stare at the wall for a moment, letting your eyes rest on nothing. You think about the narrow-faced man. You think about the list. The stolen paper is still the real danger. Liquor gets poured out. Guns get locked away. But paper changes hands quietly. Paper gets copied. Paper gets sold. Congratulations. You've just remembered the one thing Prohibition teaches better than anything else. Vice isn't the problem. Information is. So you start the next boring step. You make lists of your own. You write down everyone who saw the narrow-faced man at the yard. If anyone will admit it, you write down the switch crew names you can get. You write down the yard clerk who didn't hand you anything. You write down the warehouse foreman with clean hands. You write down the landlady. You write down the bartender. You write down Louis the cab driver, dented fender, nervous eyes. You build a web out of ordinary people, because that's what cases are, webs. The spider isn't always visible, but the threads tell you where it moved. Later that morning, after a few hours of thin sleep in a chair you don't trust, you go back out. That's the rhythm. The city doesn't pause while you rest. Neither do the men you're chasing. You start with the quiet places, not the clubs, not the rail yards, the in-between. The places where people talk because they're bored, not because they're terrified. You find a small diner near the edge of the warehouse district. Same kind of yellow light, same kind of coffee that never fully becomes coffee. You sit where you can see the door. You order eggs you don't really want. And you wait for someone who knows something to walk in. A few workers come through. A couple of clerks. A man with hands stained by ink. Then, near mid-morning, a familiar shape appears. A cab driver's posture. A cap, shoulders hunched against the cold. Louis. He pauses at the doorway when he sees you, not surprised, just resigned, like he knew this would happen the moment he took that fare. You motion him over with 2 fingers. You don't smile. Smiling makes it feel like a game. This isn't a game. It's an invoice. He sits. He doesn't order anything. His eyes dart toward the counter, toward the window, toward the door. He's tracking escape routes, the way some men track sports scores. You ask him, softly, who else he drives to the private spur warehouse. You don't say, bootleg. You say, the warehouse at the edge. You say, the one that runs at odd hours. You keep it plain. He swallows. He says he doesn't know what you mean. You let the silence sit. You sip your coffee. You watch his hands. They're trembling slightly, but not from cold. He finally mutters that he drives whoever pays. He says sometimes he gets calls. No names, just locations. He says he's told to wait in an alley, then take men to the river road, then back again. He says he doesn't ask questions because questions don't get tipped. You nod. You ask if he drove a narrow-faced man who smokes cigars and smells like river water. Louis's eyes flick up and then away. That tiny movement is your answer. You ask where the narrow-faced man goes when he isn't working. Not where he hides, where he sleeps. People always sleep somewhere, no matter how clever they think they are. Louis hesitates. Then he says there's a boarding house, not the one you visited, another, cheaper, meaner, near a stretch of factories where the air tastes like metal. He says the narrow-faced man doesn't go in the front. He goes in through a side door, like he knows the place too well. You write it down. You don't thank Louis with warmth. You thank him with practicality. Another coin slid across the table. A small payment for a small truth. Louis pushes it back at first. Then he takes it like it burns. You leave the diner and walk toward the boarding house address. Snow flurries drift in the air, thin as ash. The street is busy in a tired way. Men going to work. Women carrying groceries. A boy pulling a sled with scraps of coal. Life continuing around the edges of your case. The boarding house is narrow and old. Bricks darkened by years of smoke. The windows are patched with mismatched glass. The front steps have been worn into shallow dips by 1,000 feet trying to get inside quickly. You don't storm in. You take a breath and knock like you belong. A woman answers, older, hair pinned tight, eyes sharp. She looks you over like she's evaluating a cut of meat. You ask for a man you don't have a name for. You describe him. Narrow face, cap, cigar habit. Her expression doesn't change, but she shifts her weight. That shift is the door opening in a way. She says no. One like that here. You nod. You ask if anyone rents a room and uses the side door. You ask if anyone pays in cash and doesn't like being seen. Her lips press together. She says lots of men don't like being seen. She says it's a boarding house, not a church. You lower your voice. You tell her there was a shooting near the rail yards. You tell her a man is running, and you don't want it to bring uniforms to her doorstep. You tell her you're giving her a chance to keep her hallways quiet. That lands. Quiet is always the currency. She sighs and opens the door wider. She tells you there is a man on the second floor, room 12, who comes in late and leaves early. She says he smells like cigars and river rot. She says she doesn't know his business and doesn't want to. You climb the stairs slowly. The wood groans. Somewhere a radio plays faintly, a tinny song trying to be cheerful. A door down the hall opens a crack, then closes. People listening, people pretending not to. Room 12 is at the end. The door has scratches near the knob, like keys have fumbled there in the dark. You knock once, then again. No answer. You listen. Inside, a faint sound. Movement? Careful. Someone is there, holding their breath. You speak through the door, calm. You say you're not here to hurt him. You say you're here for paper. You say the shooting got loud, and now it's time to stop pretending this is just business. Silence. You try the knob. Locked. Congratulations. Now you do it the old way. Not kicking, not breaking. Just patience and angles. You step back and look at the door frame, the lock, the hinge pins. In this era, doors aren't built like fortresses. They're built like suggestions. You take out a small tool from your pocket. Nothing fancy, just something you've used before to open stubborn cabinets in evidence rooms. You slide it where wood meets metal. You apply pressure. Slow, steady. The lock gives with a soft pop. The door opens a few inches. Inside, the room smells like stale smoke and damp wool. The curtains are drawn. A suitcase sits on the bed, half packed. Papers are scattered on a table, some folded, some open like someone was copying them in a hurry. And the man, narrow-faced, cap on even indoors, stands by the far wall with a pistol pointed at your chest. He's calm. That's what makes him dangerous. Eddie was loud. This one is quiet. Quiet men shoot first and apologize never. You stop moving. You keep your hands low and open. You don't make speeches. You let your voice stay level, like you're ordering breakfast. You tell him you're not going to rush him. You tell him you're tired. You tell him the yards are swarming with attention now, and his best chance is to give you the list and walk away with less heat. He watches you. He doesn't blink much. He's measuring whether you're stalling for backup. You aren't. Backup is never as close as people imagine. He says you should leave. You glance, not at his gun, not directly, toward the table, the papers, the handwriting, the ink, names and addresses, times. You tell him that paper will get him killed. Not by you, by whoever realizes he has it. You tell him he's holding a lit match in a room full of gas. He smiles slightly, like you just said something flattering. He says, that's why it's valuable. You ask him who he's selling it to. He doesn't answer. Then you ask who already knows he has it. That question changes him. A tiny twitch near his mouth. The first real crack. You press gently. You tell him you saw the private spur operation. You tell him you know the liquor is moving faster now because someone is scared. You tell him Eddie is wounded and in custody, and that means the loud muscle is out of the way. Now the quiet men will start cleaning. He lifts the pistol a fraction, annoyed. He tells you to stop talking. You nod. Then you do something very boring and very effective. You offer him a trade. You tell him you can move the heat away from him for a short time if he gives you something real. Not the whole list. One page, one name, the buyer, the meeting place. Something you can act on that will make the rest of the paper less worth fighting over. He laughs softly. He says you're negotiating like a merchant. You tell him Detective work is mostly negotiating like a merchant. The only difference is your ledger is full of bruises. He considers. His gun doesn't lower, but his eyes drift toward the table, like the papers are calling him. Finally, he steps sideways, still aiming, reaches back with his free hand, and snatches a single sheet. He holds it up between two fingers, like it's a playing card. He says, "This is the page everyone wants." You tell him to slide it across the floor. You don't want to step closer. He doesn't want you closer either. He crouches slightly and pushes the paper with his fingertips. It skims over the worn wood and stops near your boot. You don't bend down yet. Bending down is how you get shot. You keep your eyes on him and shuffle your boot forward, pinning the page gently. You tell him he can go, out the side door. Now, you tell him you'll leave in 5 minutes. He hesitates. He wants to take the rest of the papers. He wants to keep his leverage, but he also wants to keep breathing. Breathing usually wins. He backs toward the side door, pistol still aimed. He opens it behind him without looking, slips through, and vanishes. You stand there for a moment, listening for footsteps on the stairs, for the boarding house woman shouting, for anything that sounds like the world reacting. Nothing. The city doesn't applaud. Then you crouch and pick up the page. The paper is thin, creased, ink slightly smeared where a thumb held it too long. It lists names that mean nothing to you yet. Initials, nicknames, addresses. But one line stands out. Not a name, a place, a meeting, a public place, because criminals love the illusion of safety in crowds. A restaurant near the Loop, respectable enough that no one expects conspiracies at the tables. A time, late afternoon, a note beside it. Payment. You fold the page carefully and tuck it into your notebook, deep, like you're hiding a nerve. Then you leave the room and relock the door behind you because you're polite like that. Or maybe you just don't want the next person who wanders in to know what was taken. Back on the street, the afternoon has that gray Chicago light. Flat, cold, honest. You walk toward the Loop with your collar up and your mind turning the page over like a coin. This is what the job actually becomes after the glamour peels off. You don't solve prohibition. You don't stop liquor. You just interrupt a small piece of violence long enough to keep it from spreading. You reach the restaurant early because arriving early is the closest thing to control you'll ever have. The place is warm and smells like bread and coffee that hasn't been sitting on a burner all night. Men in suits sit at tables and pretend they aren't doing business. A waitress moves between them like she's navigating a minefield of manners. You choose a seat where you can see the door and the back hallway. You order coffee, of course. You become just another customer with tired eyes. Then you wait again. A man arrives first, mid-level, careful, the kind of face that blends into a crowd. He sits at a table near the window and checks his watch twice. Another arrives, older, heavier coat, a briefcase held close like it contains organs. He doesn't order food. He orders only coffee and doesn't drink it. They speak quietly. You can't hear the words, but you can read the posture. This is not a social meeting. This is a transaction trying to look like a coincidence. You watch hands more than faces. Hands betray intent. The older man opens the briefcase slightly. Not enough for anyone else to see, enough for the other man to glimpse. The younger man nods once, subtle. He slides something across the table, an envelope, thick. The older man covers it with his hand, like he's shielding a candle flame. Congratulations. You found where the stolen paper wants to land. You don't jump up. You don't shout. Shouting is for theater. You stand and walk toward them like you're going to ask for the sugar. When you reach the table, you stop. You let your presence do the talking first. The older man's eyes flick up. The younger man's jaw tightens. You show your badge just enough. The waitress nearby stiffens, sensing trouble the way animals sense storms. You say politely that you need to ask a few questions. You say it like you're apologizing for the inconvenience. The older man closes the briefcase. The younger man pulls his hand back from the envelope, like it's hot. You ask their names. The older man gives a name that sounds legal and empty. The younger man gives a nickname that sounds like it was chosen to be forgettable. You ask what they're discussing. The older man says, business. You ask what kind of business. He says, import and export. You nod. You ask why that kind of business needs secrecy and envelopes. The younger man shifts in his chair. His eyes dart toward the door. He's already rehearsing a run. So you do the most boring threat in the world. You tell them you'll need to take them to the station to sort it out. Not jail, not prison. The station. Paperwork. Hours of waiting. Names written down. A file started. That's what scares people like this. Not violence. Visibility. The older man's face hardens. He says, Detective, you don't want to do this. He says, you'll make enemies. You tell him calmly, you already have enemies. That's part of the benefits package. The younger man stands too quickly. The chair scrapes. The restaurant goes quiet in that way public places do when trouble walks in. The younger man tries to step around you. You don't grab him. You shift your body to block, gentle but firm, like you're stopping someone from walking into traffic. You tell him to sit back down. He doesn't. He pushes past, shoulder clipping yours, and heads for the door. Now it becomes movement, not a chase through alleys. A short, awkward pursuit through a restaurant full of respectable people pretending not to stare. You follow. You don't run. Running makes you look panicked. You move briskly, purposeful. Outside, the younger man slips into the crowd on the sidewalk. The loop is busy. Streetcars, pedestrians, deliveries. He thinks he can disappear into it. Sometimes he can. Sometimes the city protects the guilty by simply being crowded. But today, his mistake is speed. He moves too fast. He keeps looking back. He's the only man on the block acting like he's being hunted. Congratulations, he has identified himself for you. You close distance slowly, using the crowd as cover. You reach out and grab his sleeve near the elbow, firm, controlled. He twists, tries to yank free. You tighten your grip. He curses and swings a fist. It's clumsy. Fear makes punches stupid. It glances off your shoulder. You pivot, hook his arm, and guide him toward the wall of a building where he can't flail into the street. A patrolman appears, drawn by the commotion. That's the benefit of causing trouble in a public place. The city's authority is nearby. The patrolman grabs the younger man's other arm. Together, you steer him back toward the station wagon. The older man never came outside. Of course he didn't. He stayed seated in warmth, letting the smaller man take the risk. That tells you his role. He isn't the runner. He's the buyer, or the broker, or the man who pretends his hands stay clean. At the station, The younger man gets put into an interview room that smells like stale smoke and damp wool. You sit across from him with your notebook open. The patrolman stands by the door, bored but ready. You ask again for his name. He gives it this time because adrenaline has run out and reality has stepped in. You ask who the older man is. He hesitates, then gives a name that carries weight. Someone connected, someone who knows people who know judges. You write it down carefully. Names like that are dangerous to hold. They draw attention. They also explain why the stolen list mattered so much. Paper doesn't just move liquor, it moves influence. You ask what was in the briefcase. He says, documents. You ask, what kind? He says, schedules, delivery routes, names. He says it was supposed to be insurance. If the bootleg crew didn't pay, the list would go to rivals, or to the papers, or to someone in City Hall who enjoys leverage. You ask where the rest of the papers are. He says he doesn't know. He says the narrow-faced man kept them. You ask where to find that man. He laughs, bitter. He says you don't find him. He finds you if he needs something. You lean back and let silence do work. Silence is the part of the interview where people's minds start filling in gaps. The younger man shifts, swallows, looks at the table, then blurts out one small detail. He says the narrow-faced man has a habit of visiting a printing shop after hours. A printing shop? Of course. If you have stolen paper you want to sell, you copy it. You make duplicates. You create backups. You turn one risky object into many smaller risks. Congratulations! You've just learned why this won't end quickly. You ask where the printing shop is? The younger man tells you, reluctantly, a place on the south side. A shop that prints flyers, business cards, church pamphlets, respectable ink. The kind that can also reproduce a bootleg schedule without anyone noticing, if the owner likes money more than peace. You close your notebook and stand. The patrolman looks at you like he's hoping you're done. You aren't. Now the case becomes what it always becomes. Small errands that add up to something heavy. You'll have to talk to a printer who swears he's never done anything wrong. You'll have to examine paper stock and ink smudges like their fingerprints. You'll have to convince someone to admit they saw a man after hours carrying a folder too tight to his chest. And somewhere in all of it, you'll still have Eddie bleeding in custody. The rail yard liquor being logged, the warehouse foreman making phone calls, and the older man in the restaurant pretending he never left his chair. This is why the job is boring, because the truth doesn't come in a single reveal. It comes in receipts and timesheets and the slow realization that everyone is connected by ordinary needs. So you head out again toward the South Side print shop, coat heavy, notebook heavier. The city moves around you, indifferent. Streetcars clatter, shop doors open and close. Somewhere, a radio plays through a window, tinny and cheerful, like the world has never heard of blood and slush. You walk past blocks where kids play near stoops, bundled in coats too big. You pass men unloading deliveries, arguing about pay. You pass a church with doors open, warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, and you think, briefly, about how confession is supposed to work when everyone is still lying. The print shop sits on a corner under a faded sign. The window shows samples, wedding invitations, business notices, holiday cards. Inside, you can see the press equipment, heavy and dark like industrial animals sleeping. You step in, the bell over the door rings. Sharp, the air smells like ink and paper dust. Dry, metallic, oddly clean compared to the rest of the city. A man behind the counter looks up, sleeves rolled, fingers stained black. He greets you politely. Then he sees your expression and stops greeting. You ask if he's been open late. He says no. You ask if anyone has used his presses after hours. He says, absolutely not. You nod, like that's fine. Then you ask him to show you his scrap bin. The printer frowns. He says why. You tell him you're looking for a particular kind of paper. A sheet copied recently, ink smudged on the corner. A schedule that someone wants to sell. You tell him, calmly, that if he's involved, he's not just printing. He's participating in violence. The printer's eyes flicked toward the back room. That's your first real answer. Congratulations, you found the part of the shop that doesn't match the front window. You step toward the back, not pushing past him, just moving like you already have permission. He hesitates, then follows because if he stops you forcefully, he admits there's something worth stopping. In the back room, the presses loom, steel frames, rollers, trays, stacks of paper sit on shelves, some clean, some partially used. The scrap bin is there, overflowing with misprints and cutoffs. You kneel and start sorting gently, like you're looking through leaves for a lost key. You don't rush. Rushing tears paper. Paper is fragile, and so is the truth in it. Most scraps are harmless. A misspelled name, a crooked margin, a flyer for a dance. Then you find a strip with a line of numbers and abbreviated street names, too practical to be a church pamphlet. You pull it out carefully. It's part of a list, a delivery schedule. The ink is fresh enough that it still looks slightly raised on the paper. The printer exhales behind you, a sound like defeat. You stand slowly, holding the scrap. You ask him who brought the original. He says he doesn't know. You wait. He adds that the man paid cash. He came late. He didn't want lights on in the front. You ask what he looked like. The printer swallows, narrow face, cap, cigars. You ask where the man went after. The printer says he didn't ask. You nod. Then you ask what address the man wrote on the order slip. Because even criminals who pay cash sometimes can't resist paperwork, old habits, business habits, the need to feel official. The printer hesitates, then opens a drawer and pulls out a small order book. He flips pages with stained fingers. He shows you a line. No name, just a number and a note. Delivery, back entrance, evening, an address, another warehouse, not the rail yard one. Different neighborhood, same pattern. You copy it into your notebook. You thank the printer in the same flat tone you've used all day, not because you like him, because he just saved himself a portion of trouble by cooperating now. As you step back onto the sidewalk, the cold air feels sharper after the inkworm shop. The sky is dimming again. The city is turning toward evening, the hour when respectable people hurry home and less respectable people start their rounds. You have another address, another warehouse, another place where paper and liquor and pride intersect. And you already know what's waiting there. Not a dramatic showdown, more likely a locked door, a nervous guard, a man who insists he knows nothing. Then, if you're patient, one small detail that doesn't fit, a fresh cigarette butt in a place that bans smoking, a set of footprints in slush, a ledger with a page torn out too neatly. You walk toward that next address with the steady fatigue of someone who understands the pattern now. Prohibition-era detective work is not about catching the city's biggest villains. It's about catching the city's smallest mistakes over and over until the paperwork finally pins something down. And as you go, you can already feel the next part forming, the slow pivot away from streets and warehouses and into the quiet rooms where people sit across from you and lie with soft voices.